So we have 18 people that have already joined. So we're going to go ahead and start. Can everyone hear me okay? If you can just, okay, perfect, perfect, great. Thank you everyone for joining our session today. Welcome to Grandmothers for Reproductive Rights. I am Gaylon Alcaraz, the Executive Director here. And we are so super excited to have this conversation today with Dr. Sella and Erika Christensen about Dr. Sella's recent book that is coming out. So happy Abortion Provider Appreciation Day, everyone. And just a few housekeeping notes. This is being taped, so we will share this out. People will be able to see this after the fact. And if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer section of the webinar, not the chat section. So we're not in the chat, we're in the question and answer session, and someone will be monitoring that. Um, Grandmothers for Reproductive Rights amplifies the voices and statuses of grandmothers and elders who work intergenerationally through grassroots education, advocacy, and community-centered initiatives to secure access to sexual and reproductive health rights and justice for present and future generations. So we are so super glad to do this work. And then I would like to introduce our guest and panelist. Dr. Shelley Sella is a board certified OBGYN and the first woman to openly practice third trimester abortion care in the US, which she did for 20 years. She began focusing her medical practice exclusively on abortion care in 2000. In 2010, Dr. Sella, along with Dr. Susan Robinson, set up a third trimester abortion practice at Southwestern Women's Options in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she served as the medical director. She retired in December 21, and her book, Beyond Limits, Stories of Third Trimester Abortion Care, is coming out June 2025. Erika Christensen is a later abortion patient advocate and co-founder of Patient Forward, an organization which centers people who need abortion care later in their pregnancy in advocacy campaigns, media initiatives, and abortion policy. So I would like to welcome you all, welcome everyone that's joining us today. Thank you so much for being here, and we will have the recording after. Please make sure if you're just joining us, any questions that you have, you are dropping it in the Q&A section of the webinar, not in the chat section. And on that note, Erika and Dr. Sella, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Dr. Alcaraz. Thank you for being here and introducing us and sharing your GER community. I know I speak for Dr. Sella too, and I say we're so happy to be here. And it's just been a joy to get to connect with you all. So thank you. And to echo the note about Q&A, the Q&A box is along the bottom of your screen, sort of under our pictures, just so you can see it. It says Q&A with a little box and a question mark. Please do use that space. I'll also mention that my colleague, Bonnie Lee Gilmore, will be sharing links there as well when things come up that you might have more questions about. So that's where we'll be communicating different things and where you can drop your questions. So again, so wonderful to be in virtual space with you all. My name is Erika. My pronouns are she, her. And as mentioned, I'm a later abortion patient advocate and co-founder of Patient Forward. Patient Forward combines story and strategy to ignite a culture shift on later abortion and pregnancy criminalization, which is why we've been so pleased to partner with Dr. Sella, whose book does just that. So I also want to extend a huge thank you to Kate and everyone at GER for inviting us here today. So a bit about our plan. Dr. Sella is going to share some background information about why and how she wrote her book, Beyond Limits, and about the book's structure. And then she'll gift us with a little sneak peek by reading a few short passages. And then she and I are going to have a conversation before opening it up in the last 15 minutes or so for your questions. So please do jot those down or share them in the Q&A so that Dr. Sella can tackle them at the end of our time. So now it is my great honor during this Women's History Month and Abortion Provider Appreciation Day to introduce Dr. Shelley Sella, a retired OBGYN and the first woman to openly provide third trimester abortion care in the United States. Her new book, Beyond Limits, Stories of Third Trimester Abortion Care, will be released June 3rd and is available for pre-order. And we will be reminding you of that throughout this event. So please, Shelley, take it away.
So thank you for the introduction and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with fellow GER supporters and advocates. So I'd like to start just by explaining how the book came to be. When I first started working with Dr. George Tiller in Wichita, Kansas, he had invited me to be mentored by him and then practice with him. On my first plane trip to Wichita, I started keeping a journal. And I kept going with the journal. Um, and the last entry was 22 notebooks later. And that was as I was leaving Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I then practiced. And the journal, aside from writing about what dosage of medication I used, mostly was patient stories. And when I was writing them down, I kept thinking, if only people could hear these stories, then maybe they would change their minds about abortion in generally and specifically third trimester abortion. But I had no intention of writing a book. I was just writing down what I heard from patients and their stories. And then as I was getting close to retirement, just maybe a few months before I retired, I thought, oh, I should do something with these notebooks. And that's how this book came about, which makes it sound very simple, but the whole process of writing was not so simple. Um, so the way that the book is structured is it's really based on patient stories. So the part one, I formed composites of 6 patients. Three of the patients are stories we often hear about. Those are the ones of people with fetal anomalies, some life-threatening, fetal anomalies, some not. And 3 and so I call those fetal indication patients, and 3 are what I would call maternal indication patients. And those are, for example, a teenager who hid the pregnancy and was too afraid to say anything about it, a person who was facing domestic abuse and was trapped in her home, and someone with a delayed diagnosis of pregnancy. And I deliberately had 3 and 3 because we don't hear the stories of the maternal indication patients who are just as deserving of an abortion as the ones with fetal anomalies. So their stories are interwoven with my story, and their stories are told as a week in the clinic, what they're going through, and interwoven again with my own personal story. Part 2 goes more in depth into fetal indications, what I mean by that, and maternal indications, and answers the most common questions I've heard. Why did she wait so long? And in the language that people use, why doesn't she just give the baby up for adoption? So again, I use patient stories to answer those questions. So I just want to say before I continue that I recognize that not all who are capable of pregnancy identify as women. But in the book, I mostly use women or patients, she, her, and that reflects the time that I practiced. So now on to the book. So each chapter of the book is prefaced by a quote from either an anonymous patient or a quote from Dr. George Tiller, who had really wonderful sayings that live on in my mind, and I really wanted to put them in the book. So let me begin. One moment. Okay. So this is the introduction. Miscarriage is what happens when your body isn't ready to have a baby. Abortion is what happens when the rest of you isn't. And that's from an anonymous patient. It's 3 a.m. and my 33-year-old patient, Clarissa, is in labor. She called the clinic half an hour ago to say that she was having contractions, and we instructed her to come in. While waiting for her arrival, her labor support doula, Kaylin, and I set up the labor room, turning down the lights, turning on soft meditative music, and placing a few drops of lavender oil in the aromatherapy diffuser. Clarissa and her husband, Matt, come in holding hands. When she first walks in, she doesn't appear to be in labor. Her hair is neatly tied back in a ponytail, and her face is relaxed. Suddenly, she stops walking and squeezes Matt's hand for the 10-second duration of the contraction. It's been like this for the past hour, she tells me. I thought that it would be a good idea to call. I tell her she was right. This seems like early labor, but given that Clarissa has already given birth to 2 children, the last one only 2 years ago, it could progress quickly. I bring them to the labor room, where Kaylin greets them, helps Clarissa change into a gown, and gets Matt settled into a chair next to the bed. Clarissa hasn't been sleeping well lately. At first, she lies in bed, eyes closed, moaning with contractions that occur every 7 to 10 minutes. Gradually, the contractions become more intense, and Clarissa is increasingly uncomfortable. She gets out of bed and walks around the room, one arm draped over Matt, the other over me, while Kaylin croons softly, "You are doing so well. Your body is working perfectly. You are so strong." The contractions are now getting stronger, lasting longer, and coming more frequently. Clarissa is working harder. Her face is flushed. Her ponytail has loosened, and hair covers her eyes. She stops walking and tries bouncing on the big orange birthing ball that's in the room, but she cannot get comfortable. "I feel like I have to push," she moans. "That's good," I respond. "Let me check you." Getting back in bed seems too challenging right now. Clarissa drops down onto a black yoga mat in the corner of the room. Matt sits behind her, and she leans against him while Kaylin squats by her side. Both are supporting her. I check her cervix and let her know that the baby, who they already named Jeremiah, is coming. Jeremiah is out in 2 pushes. As Clarissa and Matt had previously requested, I immediately place him on Clarissa's chest, and she hugs him tightly. Matt gazes at Jeremiah over Clarissa's shoulders. The baby is not crying, but his parents are. Last week, Jeremiah, their longed-for child, was diagnosed with a massive stroke in the womb with no possibility of recovery. Clarissa has just had a 28-week abortion at Southwestern Women's Options Clinic in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A 3rd trimester pregnancy is not a clump of cells. It is not tissue. Although until birth it is technically a fetus, most would consider a 3rd trimester pregnancy a baby, and if it were born alive, it would be a baby. It's the understandable discomfort surrounding babyhood that many feel, even those who consider themselves pro-choice, and even some doctors who provide abortion care earlier in pregnancy, that contributes to the taboo surrounding abortions later in pregnancy. I have learned in my many years in practice that doctors, patients, and advocates can have conflicting and complex feelings about abortion, but providing this care has also convinced me that no one can walk in someone else's shoes. My job is to set aside judgments, listen deeply, and support patients as they navigate what can be a difficult and painful decision-making process. Understanding third trimester abortions is the key to understanding all abortion care. If we can open our hearts to the most desperate among us, we can understand all who seek to have an abortion. We can understand the importance of safe, legal, and accessible abortion care for all during all trimesters of pregnancy. I believe that now is the time to reevaluate what it means to be pro-choice. If we are fully committed to supporting women's decisions, we must eliminate the barriers to accessing abortion care. There's no choice to be had if abortion at all stages of pregnancy is not accessible. We must realize that gestational limits are arbitrary and do not reflect the reality of women's lives. We must understand that accepting any gestational limits is a slippery slope to the total bans we're seeing in an increasing number of states. And we must wholeheartedly support the growing number of women who are driven to seek a third trimester abortion, who are as deserving as anyone else of compassionate and competent care.
Thank you, Dr. Sella. It's my favorite song. Thank you. I want to leave a little space around everything you just said and everything you just shared. And I want to acknowledge that for some in the audience, this might be new information, even folks that are pro-choice or pro-abortion, or who are abortion supporters, or they're members of abortion organizations, even folks who are, otherwise very informed, will learn, I believe, from your book, and hopefully from the conversation that we're able to have here today. With that, I would like to ask you a few questions, as hopefully questions come in from our community here as well. So, Dr. Sella, today is Abortion Provider Appreciation Day. We celebrate this day because on March 10th, 1993, Dr. David Gunn was murdered by an anti-abortion white supremacist. And as a way to honor the life and work of Dr. Gunn and all of the courageous, compassionate people who provide abortion care, March 10th became the National Day of Appreciation for Abortion Providers, beginning in 1996. This is an issue that has hit you very close to home. Can you share a little bit about Dr. George Tiller, who we also honor today?
Sure, I'm always happy to talk about him. So George Tiller was, as I said, he was my mentor, and I also worked with him very closely. He was really the first generation of providers providing third trimester abortion care. And now several generations have followed. He was born in Wichita, Kansas, lived there, and practiced there. And that always seemed kind of odd to me. Like, wow, you're doing this work, and here you are in Wichita, Kansas. But that's where he was from, and he was very connected to his community and felt like, why do I need to leave? This is where I'm from. His practice was the only word I can use is amazing. And it's something that deeply influenced my practice. It certainly was extremely competent technically, but also he placed an equal emphasis on the emotional care of those of his patients, that was really integral to his care. And I think that that's really fundamental to good abortion care. He was harassed nonstop. He was under attack nonstop. Um, Grand jury investigations, picketing, harassment, uh, not just never ending attacks on him and his family as well. And it finally culminated in his assassination in church in 2009. To me, I don't like to think in terms of heroes because then we're just idealizing people, but he really was heroic in that he kept going. He didn't stop. He had a very firm belief in providing in providing abortion care later in pregnancy, and he did that until the end.
Thank you. I think we can all take a moment to send love to his family and to all who knew him today. I think about him often. And I never met him, but I think about him and I think about his influence and feel very grateful. Shelley, since Roe was overturned, there's been more public attention on the impact of bans based on potential so-called viability of a pregnancy. In your book, you explain viability in two ways: fetal and maternal viability. You've touched on this a little bit already, but can you share more about how the issue of viability showed up in your clinic and how you think about maternal and fetal viability?
Yeah, that's many questions all in one. So let me start with just how it's commonly seen and how it's been interpreted, and then a different view of it, and also the impact, kind of day-to-day impact of this view of viability, which is in terms of fetal viability, going back to the Roe decision, which said viability was the ability to survive outside the womb with or without artificial aid. Now, back then, um, when Roe was passed, that was maybe 28, 29 weeks of pregnancy. And remember, term pregnancy is about 40 weeks, 38 to 42 weeks. These days, fetuses can survive even at 22 to 23 weeks. The viability has really decreased. Outcomes perhaps are not very good at 22, 23 weeks with a high mortality rate, but still survival is different. But so that's just looking at it from a very mechanical point of view. Can we keep this baby alive that's born at 22, 23 weeks? And the outcome doesn't matter. Just can we keep it alive? And I propose, and I'm not the only one. I think many people have a different view of viability, and it's one that centers the patient, the pregnant person. They themselves determine at every stage, at any possible stage, whether the pregnancy is viable to them. And that's why they seek an abortion, because they have made the decision that this pregnancy, at this particular pregnancy, is not viable. That could be at 6 weeks. That could be at 16 weeks. That could be at 26 weeks. And these are not just kind of random decisions. The decisions are based on the reality of their lives, on the external circumstances of their lives, and their internal understanding of those circumstances. And that's not something that a judge can decide, and it's not something that a politician can decide. That comes from the person themselves who's pregnant. That to me is viability and non-viability. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world. We live in the world where there are these kind of arbitrary gestational limits. And that deeply impacts patients, right? So if you live in a state where viability is 20 weeks and you happen to be 23 weeks, then what do you do? And so we would frequently see patients who were coming from in fact, most patients that I saw in Wichita, Kansas. And then let me just explain, after Dr. Tiller was assassinated, there was a physician in New Mexico, Curtis Boyd, who invited me and one of my colleagues in Wichita to help set up a third trimester practice in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And that's where I spent the next 12 years. So New Mexico is a small state, population not so big. And so most of the patients we would see in the third trimester were coming from other states where they had passed the gestational limit of that state and then were forced to travel. Now, the gestational limit is also arbitrary, right? Because some states say 6 weeks, some say 15 weeks, and some say to viability. That's not uncommon. And viability, again, they come up with an arbitrary limit. It's often 24 weeks. So what happens if you're 25 weeks? What happens if you're 26 weeks? Either you are forced to continue the pregnancy or you travel out of state. And so we often saw those patients.
This is a bit of a follow-up to that. I traveled from New York State to Colorado for third trimester abortion care. And for me, coming from a so-called blue state, so-called pro-abortion state, I was very surprised that care was not available in my state and that I had to travel. Is that something you found, that you did see folks from states that maybe people consider safe, or, you know, who were surprised to travel? Is that something you noticed?
Yeah, yeah, that was really common. And I think people who came from those states, of blue states, were were shocked. Like, what am I doing in New Mexico? And before that, it's like, what am I doing in Kansas? Because of, certainly stereotypes that people have about Kansas, which I confess I did too, did past tense. So yeah, they were like, wow, why can't I get it? I live in Boston. There are all these amazing medical centers. Why do I have to travel to Albuquerque? They were really shocked. And not only that, they often also felt um, that it all had to be done secretly. Like, it wasn't, because there's so much stigma attached to abortion care in general, but especially later in pregnancy, that they couldn't really talk about it. And so it was kind of like this hidden thing that they had to travel uh, and not talk to people about it, to have this safe and legal procedure, but they could not present it that way. And so there's just kind of, it's not just the law, but it's also the stigma attached to abortion care in general, again, and later in pregnancy.
Because you mentioned Boston, I'll let folks know that Massachusetts is currently trying to repeal its viability ban. If they're able to be successful, it's really going to be historic, because it will be the first time a state really publicly and intentionally and I guess boldly repealed their viability limit, and we're all rooting for them. So if you have a moment to throw a little love to Massachusetts, they're doing it, and we're really proud of them and watching closely. And I hope they're able to do it. It's so important. So next question. Abortion care later in pregnancy, as you just said, in particular third try care, is highly politicized in the public square. What do you think is missing from these conversations?
Well, I think just what I'm saying is stories. People, or really understanding the reality of people's lives. I don't want to reduce people to their stories. I mean, everyone is a full-fledged human being, but I think when people have a better understanding of the circumstances and what compelled them to seek an abortion later in pregnancy, then I think things shift. If it's just about a number, oh, gestational limit should be, whatever, 15 weeks, 20 weeks, it's abstract. It strips it of meaning. And then there's no understanding. Then there's no compassion. And that is what's missing. I think in the last election, I think there was a lot that we did hear quite a few stories of. Uh, Mostly the stories we heard, though, were women denied care who, with a wanted pregnancy, and then there was a pregnancy complication and they were denied care, and almost disastrous results. So that's one piece of the puzzle, one piece of the problem. Um, but there's also the women who seek abortions later in pregnancy, and they too deserve excellent and compassionate care. And that's what's missing, those stories, those people.
Well, they're certainly not missing from your book. So another plug to pre-order Beyond Limits. If you go to shelleysella.com, there are some easy paths for you to pre-order the book, and I hope everyone here does that. Um, My next question for you, before we open it up to some audience questions, is we actually have seen momentum shift. Certainly since Dobbs, abortion is widely popular and generally no longer a third rail in our culture, abortion itself. We even have polling recently that says that 66% of voters prefer there to be no criminalization of abortion at all. So we are seeing huge shifts towards support for the decriminalization of abortion throughout pregnancy, which is a good thing. Where do you hope the work to achieve reproductive freedom goes from here? As someone who's been around and cared for so many different kinds of patients, where do you hope we go? What do you hope happens?
Well, I think Massachusetts maybe will be leading the way. Or let's look at Canada, which hopefully will not become the 51st state, but they do have something that they can teach us where abortion is viewed as healthcare. And that's how it's regulated, that's how it's seen. And I think that is starting for people to are starting to talk in that kind of language, but not just, let's move beyond just talk and 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 aim for that. And certainly going beyond just arbitrary gestational limits and yeah, notions of viability that are exclusively based on just what I had said, like whether the fetus can survive outside the womb without taking at all consideration of the reality of people's lives. And I think that's very, very important.
Thank you. Something we say in our work is healthy pregnancy requires consent, right? I mean, show me a healthy pregnancy that someone is forced to gestate. I hope that consent can become more central to our experience of pregnancy and what we take as sort of like a given. Um, Thank you. We do have some questions in the chat.
Wait, can I just want to add, and because I've been thinking about this a lot, is that in the discussion also we often forget about the risks of childbirth in the United States in particular, among Black women in particular. And so we really shouldn't forget that, that it is dangerous to give birth in the United States and abortion is significantly safer at all terms. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us of that. Um, as luck would have it, Dr. Sella, our first question in the chat is something you and I have been talking about quite a bit. And so I hope that you will find it interesting and a little bit funny that it is our first question because of our recent conversations. The question is how a third trimester abortion is done. Um, the person asking the question says, I'm a clinic escort and believe passionately that thank you for your service. Happy Abortion Provider Appreciation Day to you too, clinic escorts. I'm a clinic escort and believe passionately that any person who is pregnant and doesn't want to be should and must have the right to an abortion. But for people I speak with who are on the fence about third trimester abortion, they are concerned with how it's done. So do you want to help folks understand what a third trimester abortion is?
Sure. And yes, that is a question that we've been talking about, and it is in my book. And I'm sorry if this is sounding like an infomercial, but really that's not the intent. Um, but that is something I really wanted to talk about in the book, is like how does a third trimester abortion occur? Because there are just kind of a lot of misinformation about that. And all I can talk about is the protocol where I worked. I think every clinic has a different protocol, but in both clinics where I worked, it was basically an induction of labor, and that's something most people are familiar with, of using medication to induce labor. When people have a stillbirth, uh, I mean that can happen at any stage in a pregnancy. Labor is induced. This is similar. A stillbirth is induced by using medication to stop the heartbeat, and then labor labor is induced. And so it's a delivery of a stillborn. And that's kind of the most basic. Um, I'm wondering if the person who asked the question is satisfied with that answer, if they need more detail. Could you let me know, person who asked the question? I mean, I think that's basically it. It's an induction delivery of a stillborn.
Thank you. Please do put in the chat if you have a follow-up, like Shelley invited.
Yeah.
And while we wait for that follow-up, I'll ask another question.
Okay.
So another question is, I represent funders that are committed to reproductive health. How do you recommend to funders who want to support the ecosystem of abortion clinics that conduct later care abortions? That is a great question. And I don't know if you have thoughts about that, Shelley, but I mean, I can offer a couple ideas. One is ACN, the Abortion Care Network, represents independent abortion providers in our space. ACN does a really great report every couple of years. And in that report, we learn how much of this care is provided by independent abortion clinics. And it's not close. By independent abortion clinic, I mean a clinic that is not a Planned Parenthood. It's the smaller clinics that are independently owned. After 26 weeks of pregnancy, 80% of the care is done by indies. At 28 weeks, it shoots up to 100%. 100% of the care. And what that means is that, you know, they need to be supported because they just don't have access to the kinds of resources that larger conglomerates have. So if we care about this care, if we want to make sure that it's available, I would say you could check out the Keep Our Clinics campaign that ACN runs, that provides resources for independent clinics, particularly when they're going through periods where they need a little bit more help. Another way you can help is that there is a fund, actually, that our organization, Patient Forward, put together with the Midwest Access Coalition. It's fundlatercare.org. You can always support Fund Later Care. 100% of those funds go directly to patients who have later appointments and who need help paying. It's important, you know, we haven't talked about this yet, but later care is incredibly expensive. Further into pregnancy, the cost of care goes up, the number of providers goes down, and more restrictions go into effect. And those restrictions will require resources to get around them: flights, cars, meals, childcare. And this is something that later abortion seekers have been managing for a very long time, since far beyond Dobbs. Since Dobbs, we know 1 in 5 abortion patients are traveling. Before Dobbs, it was already 1 in 10. And that burden was falling primarily on later abortion seekers. So this is a population that needs help. We also know that we tend to be living on the margins. Most later abortion seekers are not middle-aged white ladies like me. They tend to be low income, they tend to be young, they tend to be people of color, people who are systemically marginalized against in many ways. So this population needs assistance, and there are ways to support them, again, through Keep Our Clinics, through fundlatercare.org, and then you can always support your local abortion fund as well, because they're doing so much logistically and to support the care. And then one last one I'll say is, as funders, support the decriminalization of abortion. Right now, hundreds of millions of dollars are going to re-enshrine the Roe standard, which discriminates against later abortion seekers and providers. And this is not the time to be doing that because we don't have to. The public is with us. In fact, they're far ahead of us in many respects. And so I think at this point, organizations and advocates need to be incentivized to do the right thing. And I think funders have a lot of pull and a lot of sway there. So the more you can support those that are doing the hard, necessary work of decriminalizing abortion throughout pregnancy, I think more and more will get on board. So those are my ideas. And Shelley, I don't know how do you wish all the money was spent in protecting abortion?
Yeah, no, I think you answered it beautifully. And I think, yeah, I mean, there are two parts to it, right? One is no, there are many parts actually. One is changing hearts and minds. Another is helping those who need abortions get them and get to them. And then the third part is advocacy. So it's all important. I wouldn't say, oh, this is more important than the other, but certainly, yeah, they are. They are all crucial to change.
And we need everybody, right? Like one of my favorite writers, Mariam Kaba, says we need more people just in the fight for justice. We need more people. And that requires not throwing each other under the bus. We all have to be working together. And the only way to do that is to protect care for everyone and decriminalize care for everyone. The person who asked the very timely, wonderful question about how third trimester abortions happen does have a follow-up. She says, thank you. She says, so to clarify, it's an induction with a medication that stops the fetus's heartbeat, correct? Correct.
Yes.
And then labor and delivery results in a stillbirth. And then she says, it still seems horribly cruel that the person still has to go through labor and delivery. She shares that she has 2 children and knows what the process is like and can't imagine going through all of that to not be pregnant. That said, short of a cesarean, I guess there's no other way. And she says, thank you for answering the question. And she apologizes for typos. That's okay. Typos are welcome here. But it sounds
Um,
like she got it. What do you think, Shelley?
yeah, and I just want to answer some things. Um, yes, you that is an induction of a stillborn, and then your point about it seems cruel to go through labor and delivery. Well, one thing I want to point out, I think when we think about induction and delivery, we think, oh, the cervix needs to open to 10 centimeters, but it does not. It needs to open only as large as the pregnancy needs to come through. So sometimes it opens to 5 centimeters or 6. So in general, labor is much, much shorter. And certainly the pushing stage is very short. I mean, in Clarissa, it was 2 pushes, but in general, it's not as long as it is at a full term delivery. So although it is a delivery, it's very different. Now, different, as I mentioned, different clinics have different protocols, different approaches. Where I worked, we really fostered a midwifery approach to care. And what that meant was that we honored the process, that there was someone with the woman at all times, not just counseling, supporting her and her partner, and allowing the process to unfold. Now, other places use more medication, use perhaps a different technique. And so what I noticed is that some people would come to our clinic specifically because they wanted to deliver in that way. And some people went to a clinic that was more, I would call it more instrumental, more using instruments to remove the pregnancy at some point. And so, I mean, that's good that there were options that people could decide. But for some people, it was very important to deliver. And it also, even for people who had no expectations, it turned out to be quite empowering for many after they had done it, after they had delivered. I'm just remembering a teenager whose mother was in the other room, but she was pushing and she was doing really well, and then she did, and she was exultant and yelled to her mother in the other room, "I did it, Mom, I did it." So there's power in the process. And actually when I talked about Dr. Tiller, that's one of the things I really uh, valued about him is that he had an incredible respect for the process. It's not just about the outcome. It's how we get to the outcome.
We have some more questions. These are
Great.
excellent questions,
Yeah,
by
they
the
are.
way. These are just really thoughtful, wonderful questions. First, a comment, no question, but Dr. Sella, thank you for being brave. Um, Heroes are people who do the right thing, even when it is hard. Your compassion is revolutionary. I am listening to you in deep gratitude. Thank you for that comment.
You.
Another question. Are there folks coming behind you that will be taking over this vital practice? How are you seeing the student residency landscape be impacted by abortion restrictions?
Okay. So that's a great question. Um, and I mentioned that Dr. Tiller and Dr. Warren Hearn in Colorado were the first to openly provide third trimester abortion care. And I always say openly because I am sure, I mean, there's no doubt that it happened before, but people were doing it kind of undercover. And they were doing it before Roe. Um, so that's always happened, but they were out there. And then Dr. Tiller trained me and my colleague Susan Robinson, and Lee Carhart was also trained by him. And so I think of us as we're another little cohort. We're the second generation. And then we went on to train others. So there's a third generation, and not just people that we trained, but then people followed us. So in terms of third trimester abortion care, there are actually at this point quite a few more than there were back when there were only two. Um, so that's not a big problem. I mean, the problem, of course, is access and all the restrictions. And that the question is great because it talks about, well, now what's happening in all these states that used to train providers, and abortion's no longer legal in their state. Um, People are traveling, residents are traveling to other states to get training, but it's certainly not optimal. I think there are enough providers all overall, not just third trimester, but there's not enough opportunities to practice because of all the bans. Erica, I don't know if did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I guess I just like to use any opportunity to remind people that modern later abortion care is safe, ethical, and for the people who need it, a miracle. And I think what we're seeing is that the provider population is progressively more reflective of the patient population, which is so exciting. Later abortion providers now, we have so many women. I mean, for Shelley to be the very first one, and now to see so many women providing this care, younger providers, providers of color. There are two new all-trimester abortion clinics that have opened in just the past couple of years. One is Partners in Abortion Care in Maryland. The other is Valley Abortion Group in New Mexico. And they are owned by women. They are training other providers coming up behind them. So the care is incredible. It's worth protecting in our laws and in our policies. We're very lucky right now in that way. There's so many more questions that I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all of them, but Shelley, I want to try to get to a couple more. Let's see. We talked about people coming behind you that will take over. How can we be involved in decriminalizing pregnancy in our communities and states? There's great work being done in every state, I will say. Just ask the questions. Right now there's something that we call in our corner of the field beyond Roe in the streets, Roe in the sheets. That means if people in states are using the language of abortion freedom and protecting abortion from government interference, ask the question, does that mean throughout pregnancy? Because I think sometimes something that I've learned from my colleague, Banyan Lee Gilmore, is that sometimes we have to be explicit because I know I used to assume, well, if we're talking about getting the government out of pregnancy, surely that includes patients like me. And then you see the policy, and in fact, it includes a limit. So I would say read the things that you're being asked to support and ask the hard questions if they don't reflect your values. Some more questions. Oh, Shelley, how did Dr. Sella keep herself and her family safe and live her life, especially after Dr. Tiller's murder?
I need to unmute. Well, I mean, Dr. Tiller was under horrific attack for years and years. And he was very open about what he did. He lived and worked in the same community. I did not. And I think that gave me a huge amount of safety. It was like a physical and a mental barrier. Um, right after he was killed, um, assassinated, I was under federal marshal protection for a little bit. Um, and they were in my neighborhood around my house. And I have to say that didn't make me feel safe. It made me feel less safe because if they're there, then there must be a problem. So that wasn't actually very comforting at all. Um, let's see, what else? Is there something else I need to answer about that question?
No, just, I mean, you answered it, just how you've considered your own safety, given that your colleagues have been under tremendous threat.
Yeah.
And it's your relationship to fear is interesting to me. So it's always interesting to me to hear you talk about your relationship to fear.
Yeah. I mean, I think perhaps I lived, well, actually, it was very funny. I said this to a friend the other day. Well, maybe I lived in denial. And she was like, yeah, you absolutely did. But I, it was very deliberate. Like I'm not going to, and I don't want to sound like, oh, I'm not going to be afraid and I'm so tough. No, not at all. It's just the work was so important, so compelling. Um, that's what took precedence over everything. And I I mean there are moments where I felt unsafe, I was scared, but it wasn't like this overarching fear that ruled my life. It just wasn't.
You're also incredibly tough. If anyone, if anyone follows Dr. Sella on social, if you all are on Instagram, her social channel is at Dr. Shelley Sella. And on her channel, you will see her climb boulders. You will see her swim miles a day. I'm like constantly in awe of what you're able to do. So it's also possible that you're just maybe built stronger than some of us. You won't buy it, but I think so.
No, no, I don't think so. Um, I think though, for years, I mean, I decided to go to medical school to learn how to provide abortion care. And I spent years looking for a mentor. And then I found Dr. Tiller. And it was such a gift. That was so important. That was the most important thing, to be able to be trained and work with someone who provided such an amazing model of care, a model of care that I think every provider should provide in all realms of healthcare. That was the most important thing, and that is the most important thing.
So there's a bit of a follow-up to that question, which is, are you concerned about safety now that you'll become public with your life and your book? Is that any different than providing care?
Well, I haven't really given it much thought. I mean, I guess there are so many more wackos these days who are given license to be that way under this administration, that perhaps I need to be in a bit less denial. Uh, but we'll see. I haven't dealt with that yet. Yeah. But I mean, the point of the book is to get these ideas across, is to help people have a better understanding of abortion care later in pregnancy, to think beyond gestational limits. And if I didn't write the book, and if I don't speak up, what's the point? Then I just have my 22 notebooks, which are really nice, but I just keep them in my house. So it was a deliberate decision to write the book. And so now it's a deliberate decision to be out there and talk about the messages of the book.
Well, we're very glad that you decided to do that, because I think it's going to inspire some really interesting conversations. We're very excited to put a book guide together for reading groups. I know folks love to have book clubs. So we're putting together a guide to help to help those conversations a little bit in your book clubs. And we'll be working on some other schemes to help folks interact and learn with the book. Dr. Sella, thank you for your time. Thank you for being so open. And I will pass it back to Dr. Akaraz. And thank you so much for having us.
Just wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Sella, for an amazing conversation. Thank you, Erika, for facilitating this great conversation. We are deeply appreciative of the work that you do to make accessible the work that has been done for women. I met Dr. Tiller a long time ago when I was at the Chicago Abortion Fund at a conference and sat next to him at lunch. And he just left all these imparting little pieces of nuggets and things, trust women, and and you're just so excited to hear people that really believe truly in reproductive justice. So thank you both for being here today. Thank you to the audience for joining us during your lunchtime, for the great questions. And like we said, this is being recorded and it will be shared out. So in case you want to send it out to your friends or some other people that weren't able to be here today, you'll be able to do so. We appreciate everyone for being here. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Happy Abortion Provider Appreciation Day.
Take care. Bye-bye.